Welcome into another session here of educational videos for the International Wine and Food Society here in Birmingham, Alabama. We hope you're enjoying your Friday afternoon as much as we are. The reason we're enjoying this Friday afternoon so much is that we are about to talk about a very special region in Spain, Rioja.
The special region.
The most specialist of all regions.
No, I wouldn't
Spain.
say it's the most specialist.
And we're off to the races.
Here we go. So today, we're going to have a little bit of a different format today. What we're going to do is something really fun. We're going to do more of a tasting panel session here and talk about the wines, talk about the history, talk about some food pairings, and if nothing else, we're going to hopefully open some minds and open some hearts to some fantastic wines that maybe you haven't had before. So joining me, as always, Drew Sarton, and today we have a very special guest. This is Gia Bivens, who is here. She is by far the most qualified person at the table to talk about wine. So,
and yet this is the first time they've invited me.
well, it's by design, as you can all imagine.
We don't like to punish people by doing this.
That's right. We also don't want to get shown up too much. So,
Fair.
Got it. Fair enough.
Without further ado, Drew, if you don't mind, if you can give us just a little bit of a background here on Rioja specifically. So what we do know about Spain in general, the wine regions as a whole started being planted, as far back as the Roman Empire.
Go before Phoenicians.
So the Phoenicians started this. Wow. So we have a long history of wine here.
Yeah.
But what is it? Is there a turning point? Is there a hallmark that where we can say Rioja?
Yeah, so he's absolutely right. The area of Rioja, going back to the Phoenicians, definitely in the Roman times, and really in the 1870s is where we can really say, okay, now we're talking about serious wineries and serious legitimate continuation of families, right? Two of the wines we're going to taste here are two out of the three original Rioja producers that came from the 1870s.
Wow.
So that is kind of our timeline, right? We're going to start with the 1870s, where a couple different families in negociant style started to become wineries, and then it more and more solidified, gained more land, and of course it went from there. When we're talking about Rioja, we're talking about north central Spain, about I think 2.5 hours north of Madrid. And Rioja is quite a large area. And in the recent 20 years, they have made a more concerted effort to really talk about three DOs, or geographic areas within Rioja. One is called Rioja Alta, Rioja Alavesa, and then one that we probably know as Rioja Baja, but was recently renamed Rioja Oriental. So those are the three regions. They are geographically similar, mainly due to latitude and to a certain degree temperature variations. They are different in elevation and different soil types that we see from there.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that the three different regions are synonymous with price.
No, because a lot of Rioja will have a blending of different grapes from those three areas. There is more and more, in a modern sense, wineries that are focusing within certain areas. So instead of having grapes from Rioja Oriental and Alta, they'll make a Tempranillo just from Alta, right? Lots of wineries in that area, so it's not a hard and fast rule, and we'll talk about some of these that are going to get wines from all over Rioja as the big area of Rioja, and then some that are specifically getting grapes from one of those three specific DOs, right?
Gotcha.
So when we're talking about Rioja, in general, again, a little bit of variation within each DO, a very hot area, a lot of vines are trained into that bush vine kind of low to the ground, kind of protecting from the heat kind of area.
Like we may see in the Rhone Valley.
Exactly. So you got a lot of heat from that area. You're going to get a lot of sunshine. And while in certain areas you have elevation, so you have good acidity retention, at nighttime, you are getting, again, lots of sun, lots of fruit, lots of bigger, bolder grapes. You would not grow Pinot Noir here, obviously. Can't do it by law, but more importantly, the grape is too thin-skinned. It would just get beat up. It would be very flabby and very horrible. The main grape we're going to talk about today, and we'll kind of touch on some other ones though, and what is synonymous and what is known in Spain as the red grape is Tempranillo. Tempranillo is very similar to Cabernet in a lot of ways as far as fruit, as the way it's treated. You get less variation, you get a lot less green vegetal notes if it's handled a lot different ways. It's more of a bright cherry with sometimes some dark plum kind of characteristics. We're going to talk about some other varietals as we kind of taste the wines, but that is one that you're going to hear us come back to a lot.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Tempranillo is though that a lot of times it is treated like Cabernet. Tempranillo has a little bit thinner skin, though.
I've always kind of thought as Tempranillo is also kind of veering into that family of like Sangiovese
Very much
and,
so.
Right.
and Nebbiolo. And especially because if you look at the color of Tempranillo, you get that more kind of brickish around the edge.
Especially older ones,
Exactly.
especially, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's important because, like, as we get into these wines, we're going to see this. But the thing to me that makes that fun is that I feel like there's a little bit of a misconception out there where a lot of times the Spanish wines can be like big, heavy, tannic,
Right.
Yeah.
bombastic wines,
Priorat.
right? Which
They can
in
be,
fact, yeah, certainly they can be. There's certainly that quality can exist, but they have a much more approachable side to them as well. You know, where they can be a little bit more delicate, a little bit more perfumed, and a little bit more. They can be ready to drink a little bit sooner than maybe some people think when they start talking about like a Reserva, type tier wine within, Rioja or something like
Yeah,
that.
and I would say that another reason why Cabernet is the only reason why I kind of make that association as well is we have a lot of American drinkers that when they try Spain for the first time, due to availability obviously, but due to style, this is kind of where they go. There's a lot of American oak used in Rioja.
Sure.
There's a history there as to why. More and more, we're seeing a blending of American and French oak, or some producers just using French oak, and those are going to be that nicer, kind of lighter style with a little bit more Sangiovese
Right.
aspects to it. But because of the big fruity component of the Tempranillo and traditional and history with using a lot of American oak, you have got a lot of synonymous kind of flavor profiles that a California cab drinker would find.
A lot of those wood tannins, possibly.
Exactly.
So I have a question. Speaking of the oak regimen for Riojas, does it have to be all American oak, or it can be?
It can be a blend. It can be now, and we'll get into this when we go into the specific some wines. There are oak aging requirements, but there are not oak.
Not
sourcing.
specific style oak.
There's not sourcing. There's not toasting. There's not. That is where it comes to individual winery.
Oh,
So you could have Hungarian.
You could.
You'd have whatever type of oak you want
You
to
could
have.
have Spanish oak, which I don't think is a thing, but
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that doesn't exist.
But more importantly, the time in oak is more important as a legal thing for the Rioja
classification.
and for the different class. So
Then it
that
is
is
what-
obviously that's a natural lead in. So let's touch on that real quick because we're gonna have to talk about that
Right.
as we go through. So instead of having to give the breakdown each time,
Right.
real quick, 100,000 foot view. We know that there's different classifications
Yes.
within Crianza, Reserva, Grand Reserva.
Right.
Well, for broad terms here, what is the difference?
All
What
right.
does that mean?
So we're going to actually add on one more, which is Hoven, spelled with a J, and that means young vines, right?
Okay.
And so that is basically one that does not undergo a specific aging requirement. It is kind of table wine, if you want to put it that way, or just easy drinker, okay?
AKA less than.
Crianza.
There we go.
So,
Okay.
now the three official and three kind of primary ones you want to know about are Crianza, Reserva, Reserve, and Gran Reserva. Each of those have different aging requirements in both oak and bottle, and that's important, right?
All right.
So it is a certain amount of time minimum. Now, each winery within that kind of classification can go above and beyond that in aging, but they have to meet certain criteria. So for Crianza, it is 1 year in oak, 1 year in bottle. That's the minimum. Okay?
That's easy to remember.
1 and 1.
Okay.
A lot of them do it differently. A lot of them will do like 2 years in oak, 1, whatever. The Reserva level combined has to be a minimum of 3 years. At least 1 year in oak, but then you have to do 2 years in bottle.
Yeah, or if it's a
Or-
minimum of 1 year in oak, you could do
2
2
years in
years in oak
and
1 year in bottle. Yeah, okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Could you do? Not saying anybody would. Could
Sure.
you do 35 months in oak and then 1 month in the bottle?
I'm sure somebody could, but
So
I've
you
never
can.
heard.
All right.
Now, and when I'm referring to these agings, I'm talking about the red wines. White wines and rosé also, to be classified as that, have their own specific aging requirements. They are typically a little bit less than the reds. For
Sure.
instance, Crianza, it's 6 months in oak and then 6 months in bottle, or a year in bottle. It's a year total in that case. Reserva, it is 1 year in oak, and I don't want to say it's 1 year in bottle as well, or 2 years in bottle. So it's a little bit different. But the ones that we see mostly in that system is the red wines. Finally, for Grand Reserva, that is a total of 5 years in combination of oak and bottle, and it has to be at least 2 years in oak.
In the oak.
Yes, and then 3 years in bottle.
Or whatever combo
Right.
above.
And we'll throw that up on the screen so you can kind of see that.
So then all right. I've got a question for you.
Okay.
In America, if a winemaker in Napa Valley wants to let a wine sit however long in a barrel, however long, whatever, there's no regulations there, right? Like, sure, there may be common practices, but there's no. So why then would the Spanish government feel the need to come in and say you have to do this to meet these? Why is that a thing? Why is it so important that a wine spends X amount of time in whatever? Why should they care?
I think it has to do a lot with just the history of Rioja and the importance of those wines. I mean, it kind of seems like it might be an archaic thing, but conversely, there's no laws in the United States for Reserva. You can make a wine and age it for 3 months in a giant oak tank, throw some oak chips in it, and call it California Chardonnay Reserve, and that means absolutely nothing because we don't have any legal requirements regarding aging.
Right. There's also no price point component with that. You could have a $10 reserve, which doesn't sound like a really good reserve, honestly, but that can exist in California. So, and you're absolutely right. It's a history of maintaining the quality, giving the wine the proper aging to kind of to be released, but more importantly, there is obvious price breaks. There's price increases at each of those levels, and because of that expense of holding it in oak longer, it denotes a more refined wine.
Well, I feel like this is where the phrase "time is money" comes into play, right?
Totally.
Absolutely,
wine
it's a lot of
barrel
juice in
that's
barrels. You don't make money with your juice in
It
the
doesn't
barrels.
make money when it's sitting there. It makes money when it comes out. So I think we're going to maybe see this as we start moving through the whites and the reds. I think one thing that we're going to need to look for as we go through this, and again more of this kind of tasting format, is one thing that we're going to want to look for is how do those aging requirements impact the wine, and do we notice a quality difference? Do we notice a drinkability difference? What do we see as we move through? So, without further ado, let's start with what I would think is one of the most historic producers in Rioja, and we're gonna actually have their white wine. This is the Rioja White from Muga, and I could not be more excited to taste this. So
it's a great wine. It's this one doesn't have any classification system on it, so it's just the white Rioja. It's Viura, Garnacha Blanca, and Malvasia Blanca. And speaking of oak regimen, this is French. This is mainly French oak, but what a very interesting thing about Muga is that they actually own their own cooperage.
Oh, wow.
So they get their own barrels and they get their own wood and they make their own barrels. There's not a lot of wineries in the world that do that. Silver Oak makes its own barrels. Muga makes its own barrels. Gigal makes their own barrels. And Louis Latour makes their own barrels.
Okay,
so it's a very interesting concept.
This is the
2020,
by the way.
Yes.
Sorry, I wanted to point that out before we moved on.
So in my mind, what I'm thinking, the question then becomes, why would you do that? Why, if you're a winemaker and you have all these other responsibilities, why on earth would you want to start getting into cooperage?
Control free.
Yeah, and the
vertical integration in business. Right.
The only thing I can think of is that, like, what you may have in your mind is for the white, for example, you may have a specific vision of how you want that to turn out.
Yeah.
So why not be able to control the exact staves that go into every individual barrel?
Yeah. It's obviously it's got a little bit more money that you're going to be throwing into the winemaking, but I think that there's a level of control with that. Again, we just counted on one hand how many people.
And also, there have been times when getting good barrels has been hard because of production levels, and then you see spikes in prices from either French oak or sometimes with American oak. So.
American oak's going up because of the whiskey market.
And exactly. And so by being able to just get the raw product, you can kind of cut down some of the costs of that production level. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's an upfront cost, but eventually it kind of comes down because you're doing it yourself.
All right, so...
This wine is delicious. And it has been aged in some French oak, but if anything, it just kind of rounds it out a little bit. There's not,
This is
it's
really
not like a big oak body.
So the next one we're going to talk about, and this is going to introduce a new grape for us. So we talked about Tempranillo. Another one that you commonly see as a blending grape is a grape called Graciano. This one is actually one of those kind of characteristics of a Joven wine. It's not a Crianza, not a Reserva, not a Grand Reserva, and this is 100% Graciano. And you saw something about this, right?
No, I think it's very unusual. First of all, it's not crazy expensive. I mean, the price point on this wine is right,
$10.
I knew it was under 15, but if you're looking for something that's a little bit different,
You mean like retail, like to go pick up off a shelf, like under $15?
yeah,
Okay.
for a Graciano, I mean,
All
it
right.
definitely kind of hits that alternative red selection, but it's cool because it is actually technically it's from Rioja, but look at the color. I mean, that you can tell right there just with this dark
That's
purple
what
color.
I don't know
That
that y'all
even-
can tell, but
This is where, and I'm wondering with a lot of Riojas, like Graciano kind of lending itself to that,
color
the
component,
color,
yeah.
the color component.
Oh my
Does
gosh,
it
I
get
mean-
like a Malbec almost kind of feel
Yes,
to it?
yes, that's
Yeah.
what I
If
was going to say. Like this, but not even like South American style. This is almost like that Cahors style
A little
Malbec.
bit.
That
No,
like,
that's a good point.
but just that color. I mean, this is evoking ideas just looking at it in the glass of
I'm getting
Cabernet
pepper.
Merlot. Like,
Yeah.
It's
wow.
all there's
There's a
so
lot
it's a
of black
Malbec
pepper.
Syrah
Yeah, there's a black
thing
pepper
going in
component
there that is just
I mean, and listen,
really delicious.
I haven't tasted it yet, but on the appearance and the nose, what I'm already thinking is like, how good is this with a charcuterie board?
Oh,
Because
gosh.
everybody is always asking like, what red wine can I put out with charcuterie? Because honestly, Pinot Noir is light, but it doesn't go with a lot of the stuff that you would traditionally find on a charcuterie.
A lot of
But like
spicy
this,
yeah.
oh my gosh! I mean,
So the next one we have is called Finca Saint Martin. This one and our last one are from the same winery group, which is very new to Alabama. We're very excited to be able to get them in Alabama now. And the name of the winery is called La Rioja Alta. And so that seems like a really cool, easy way to remember. Rioja, La Rioja. There's a reason why. It was one of the first
Where
ones
are they?
in Rioja, right? And so they are one of those first three wineries that really started in the 1870s. This is called Torre de Ona, which is their, and so La Rioja, the main winery, is located in Rioja Alta. Makes sense. This is their Rioja Alavesa property, and so they're connected, but this is kind of treated separately. They only get grapes from Rioja Alavesa,
that's cool.
and
Yeah.
they have their own winery in Rioja Alavesa. So instead of it being a situation where some places do this, where they'll get grapes from everywhere and it comes to a central location, if they're making wines in Rioja Alavesa, it's in Alavesa made. If it's in Rioja Alta or Rioja Oriental, they're making it in those specific DOs.
So
Same
that's
winemaker? Does every
Same.
winery have its own winemaker?
It has its own winemaker.
Ah, interesting.
So
Okay.
let's touch on that briefly because that seems like such a that seems like such a novel idea to where like if you had a winery in AOC, GSC whatever, that you would have a winery there if you had vineyards there. But
It's expensive, though.
why is that such a big deal though? Why would you? What is the disadvantage
A lot of oak, yeah.
of taking grapes from, let's just say, if you were growing them in Alavesa and you were harvesting and then you were driving all the way to Alta? Like,
Right.
why is that a bad idea?
It's
What
not
does
it's
that
a
do?
Look, it's not that it's a bad idea, and a lot of wineries do that. This winery has been around since 1870, so they were able to start this property in Alavesa in 1970.
Okay.
So 100 years of them having a winery in Alta, they were like, okay, we're going to do a lot of wine coming out of Alavesa. Well, let's just keep that wine there. It could also be that their winery in Alta couldn't handle the amount of wine coming from all different areas, and they opened up another winery. A lot of times, if a place is going to ship from one place to the other, they do it at nighttime when it's cooler, and it's usually
Why?
not because it's cooler and because it's not the sun
The
is
sun's not beating
blistering.
down the grapes.
Right.
Right.
So that's the key here. Is
Yeah,
that
of course.
if you're going straight from vineyard to winery in the
Yes.
same area, you're preserving all that beautiful acidity
You're
and all
keeping
those
the fruit,
things,
you're keeping
right?
the acidity. There's less risk of losing fruit or losing kind of flavor components. So yes, when you can get it directly from the source in the area, that's great. It's not necessary all the time, but for something like this, it's really good.
Which we've even heard of, like some people when they do have to transport grapes, they're putting like blocks of oh, what is it? The nitrogen.
Like dry ice and
Yeah,
stuff?
dry ice and
Yeah.
stuff in the buckets to keep everything cool and all that.
So this is the Crianza level. So this is gonna this actually undergoes about 22 months in oak, and then the rest of that another year in bottle. This is a 2017 vintage, so it's actually got a little bit longer in bottle than that.
The first thing that pops out of this nose right now is, well, first of all, the color is completely different than the Graciano that we had, but the oak, that sweet oak, pops up out of the glass, which is something that wasn't in the Rio Madre.
Right, and conversely, and a lot of times in Rioja, when we're talking about these Reserva and Grand Reserva levels, and even with a Crianza, you typically have a blend of different grapes, whether it's Tempranillo, Graciano, Menzuelo, which is another one. This is 100% Tempranillo. So this is a very good example of Tempranillo as a monovarietal example.
That's crazy. And there it is. There's that kind of, that little lighter red, like kind of a brick.
The Bricco,
Yeah.
as the Italians would say.
So the next two we're going to try are two different Rioja Reservas. Really cool. Both of them blends, both of them from old estates. The Lopez Heredia is one of those, another one of the primary three that were one of the first ones in the 1870s. But Vino Real is also a very old estate there. And it kind of shows how different ages and different times in oak can make a difference. Both of these are current vintages. This one, the Lopez Heredia, is a Vina Bosconia. This is their Tempranillo blend. It is a 2009.
And that's current vintage.
Correct. And this is 2015 from Vina Real, which is their Alavesa. So this one is coming from mostly Alta grapes, but it does have some Oriental in there, and you can see
right off the bat, like just even pouring, you see that brick color.
Yeah, that's got some
absolutely
it's got some terracotta to it.
There, especially around the edge, you're getting some like a garnet.
Yeah, wow,
Garnet.
that's yeah.
And 2009 is the current vintage.
Current
of
2009.
So
is the current
Tempranillo
vintage.
and Garnacha.
There's Garnacha, Graciano, and Menzuelo. Now, here's a fun historical note, which I had been in the wine business for 12, 13 years before I figured this out or heard about this, and I was surrounded by a lot of wine professionals who were also like, what did you just say? There's a difference in bottle shape. A lot of times you will see Riojas in the Bordeaux style bottle. When you see it in the Burgundy bottle, you're like, well, why is it in Burgundy bottle? You don't see a whole lot of Cabernets in a Burgundy bottle, right? Rioja as an area was one of the main stops it basically was where the train system stopped, right? So trains would come into Rioja, they would load up, and then they did a lot of shipping into France. During phylloxera, there was a huge need in France for wine because a lot of their vineyards had been destroyed. So, in a marketing coup, they said, okay, we're going to send Tempranillo, things that have Tempranillo in it, in a Bordeaux bottle because it's kind of like Bordeaux, right?
Okay.
I can see where we're going with this.
This style, this has Tempranillo in it, but it also has Garnacha, which was very similar to Northern Rhone Grenache.
Yeah, the Rhone varietal.
Same thing. Blends with Garnacha in it came in a Burgundy bottle so that they could send it from Spain to France and go, it's kind of like
That's
Burgundy.
kinda
That is fantastic.
So it is weird to see a Burgundy bottle. You see it less often, but when there's Garnacha, if you see a Burgundy bottle in Rioja, there's Garnacha in it.
That's an easy cheat.
Easy cheat.
That's a very easy cheat. And I feel like also it's going to be an indicator of some other aromatics and some other flavors
Well,
that
let's
we
talk
should
about
expect
that.
in the wine.
And I think this is super light. This is very much Northern Rhone-esque in a sense.
Oh my gosh.
This has got some really nice acidity. There's some tart cherry there. There's some tart
I mean,
cranberry.
and even just this like roasted fig component going on.
Yeah.
Like this,
Lopez Heredia is known for their old bottlings, especially for their rosé and whites, which are super old and amazing. And it is the best part is they've done the aging for you. So when you get again current vintage 09 on the Reserva, it's good to go. Like,
that's fantastic. That's
One
really
of my favorite things about going or looking at old books, or not even old books, but like some old literature about Rioja in Spain is a lot of the food pairings.
Totally.
They suggest pairing reservas and grain reservas with lighter style foods.
Yeah.
Like a salad.
Right.
So it's very interesting to me that we're in this kind of landlocked part of Spain
and yet they're saying salad.
and they're saying this is your salad wine.
That's
Right.
amazing.
Yeah, this is your
Totally.
salad
The
wine.
one that's been aged the longest.
Yeah.
So again, Cune, which is actually CVNE, which actually stands for
You can do it.
I don't know if I can. Consortium Viticulture de Norte España, which is basically the wine consortium of northern Spain.
Bravísimo.
But nobody was going to say CVNE every time that they sold it in America, so we just call it Cune, which is what the winery eventually did too.
Yeah, that's fair.
So this is another Reserva level. Again, it's got some Tempranillo in it. It's got some Garnacha, hence the Burgundy style bottle. This has undergone the minimum aging and a little bit more, but not as much as this 09. So this is a 15. So a little bit darker color, a little bit more bolder fruit. Still has that nice acidity and some other similar attributes as the 09, but it's not got that age quality as much.
So I feel like with the 09, like, you know, you were mentioning like that call for like the salads, the greens, like that sort of thing. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking like, you know, okay, like a little bit of like duck breast, maybe, you know, even some hearty white fish wrapped in like Chilean sea bass wrapped in prosciutto, something like that. I feel like with this, we're now getting into like a more of a darker, richer realm. We're braising meat,
yeah.
I think lamb or a lamb burger or something like that. That kind of thing would go really well with this. Sausages, just
For
normal,
sure.
just normal. Again, go back to the charcuterie, which we're chowing down on.
Let's see
This
that.
is that got that structure and it's got the boldness to be able to hold up to it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the entire winemaking team at Cune all females?
That's correct, and that's a very good point.
That's pretty cool.
And while that is a point of distinction globally and even in the United States, especially in a lot more, let's say, not patriarchal, but definitely in a society like Spain where there's a lot of still old remnants of a very patriarchal system, that is a thing that stands out hugely.
This is amazing.
My gosh, this is so cool.
Yeah, and I think that it also goes to show that if you were to have your own tasting lineup at home,
so different.
that if you wanted to pair these two, I think that the way that we tasted it was perfect. You start with the older one first.
Yeah.
And then do this one next, just because there's a little bit more concentration of fruit.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Last but not least, we're going to go to that Grand Reserva level. So this is a 2011 vintage. So we're talking about 10 years old. Even though that the winery only has to do 5 years in age, they do an extra 5. So they're,
Overachievers, huh?
Yes, this is current vintage. This is called the Grand Reserva. This is from La Rioja Alta, which we talked about earlier. This is all Alta fruit. And it's called the Grand Reserva 904. And what that 904 designates is the fact that this bottling started for La Rioja Alta in 1904. It was called the Reserva 1904 at that point. They ended up later on dropping it to 904 and calling it a Grand Reserva because they owed it or aged it a lot longer. Again, this winery started in the 1870s. It's got a huge history in the area. Combination of French and American oak. The oak is there on the nose for sure, though.
It's on the palate too. I mean, it's that real kind of almost cherry strawberry candy. Like
Yeah.
I get that in this, but also like a real like dried potpourri kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you that really like aged Napa Valley Cab, and I'm very specific with that because it's not like flashy bright fruit. It is deep concentrated, stewed, almost fruit. If you like a aged Napa Cab, this is right up your alley.
Yep.
I think.
I mean, and I feel like with the amount of like oak presence here, like to me, I'm thinking like just give me that tomahawk ribeye, give me some red meat with some fat to it,
Totally.
and we're gonna open this bottle. We're gonna drink half of it with the ribeye, and then we're going outside and we're smoking a cigar.
Or around a fire pit and enjoying a cold night with a hearty red. So this is really. So again, the good news is we're talking about Spain, and in some of our other videos we've talked about what an incredible value is that Spain is. Again, for a Grand Reserva, this is going to be around $70, but you're talking about a wine that's been aged for 10 years for you already.
And can age for how much longer?
I mean, 20 more years.
This has got a lot of
legs.
time.
It's got some time. So, again, within its relative price point, that's not an inexpensive wine. It's not a Tuesday night wine like the Graciano might be. It's definitely like if you're investing in tomahawks, invest in a good wine. That's really going to outkick its coverage when it comes to the comparative set of what you're getting age-wise and structure-wise.
It's the fun thing to me. Like Spanish reds are when we talk about like the types of foods that you would see on like a holiday table, especially Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that. Like it's kind of like that red category. that you never see, but that your palate always wants, but you don't know exactly how to
Right.
express it. You know what I mean? Like,
Totally.
you're like,
It's
I
hard
don't
to
know
say
what
I want an old red wine. Doesn't come off.
Right,
Right.
right. But Spain offers that.
Yeah.
They offer that off the shelf any day of the week. You can go into a great wine shop, of which we have plenty here in Birmingham, Alabama, and around the state of Alabama for that matter. That you can go in and you can find an amazing Spanish wine that's already got age to it, and it's going to be at a fantastic price point.
Yeah.
So
And that's the other thing is when you see an old wine from Spain, don't go, oh, that's been here for a long time. No, it probably just got there. There's a lot of times where, again, these current vintages are a decade old.
Mm-hmm. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope that you enjoyed looking at Rioja as much as we did. We always appreciate it, and we look forward to enjoying a glass of Rioja with you.
Thanks.
Bye.